Hello, everybody. Listen, I need our audience today to help me out. We're going to have a little focus group. So, audience, I need you to help me throw out some words that just, you just love about the Quilt Show. Give me some ideas.
Inspiration.
All right. Inspiration. Quilts. There's an L in there somewhere. Teaching.
Shortcuts.
Shortcuts. All right. This is great. And you know what? Our show just embodies all of these today, and our guest is going to teach you some wonderful design concepts and how to infuse originality into your own quilts. Stay tuned. This is going to be a great show. It's a new day on The Quilt Show with your co-hosts, Alex Anderson and Ricky Timms.
Welcome to The Quilt Show. We are so glad you're joining us today, and I know the audience is going to be very thrilled with this show, as am I. But to you, it's no surprise.
Well, no, it's not. But before we go there, I just want to say, as an artist, as a quilter, sometimes it's hard to find your voice and to kind of know what direction to go into. And so today, we're really going to explore a little bit about that in an artful way. And we have a fabulous guest to teach us. Her name is Deborah Boschert. Welcome to the show, Deborah.
Deborah. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm really excited and so excited, but that's going to come out later, so I won't even go there.
Well, and I want to say, too, I heard about you from Ricky, and I walked onto the set, and your sensibilities are right on the money.
Thank you.
In my opinion.
Thank you. I really appreciate hearing that.
Yeah. Well, let's take a look at a couple quilts just to get going so people can understand what we're talking about.
Okay, so let's talk about the first two bowls that you've got. Yeah?
Yes, the one on the top is called Nourished, and the one beneath it is Depleted. And you can see that they're the exact same composition, but I created them to suggest entirely different feelings. So you see Nourished has growing colors and growing elements, and then Depleted is a little bit more gritty and rough around the edges. And I will say that making that Depleted quilt, it fit its calling. It was a challenge. I struggled all the way through.
And did you make this challenge for yourself when you started? Did you just pull out a word and say, this is what I'm going to do?
I really wanted to make two quilts that were not really opposites because they're related, but that said two entirely different things.
Well, they do.
They really do.
Yeah.
That's really, really a great concept. And when you did the second one, or the Depleted one, was there an emotional difference in you as the artist?
Good question.
I don't know that there was anything specific going on in my life, but I was pushing myself to explore some themes that I hadn't before, and it was uncomfortable. But good results. Good to be put in that position.
Great.
All right, now you've been quilting for a while. How did that start? When did that start?
I started by making a Quilt in a Day book by Eleanor Burns.
Oh, yay.
Right on. Yep. If you want to learn a 1/4-inch seam and strip piecing and choosing fabrics, it's all there. So I did that. Made piece quilts from patterns for several years, and then I eventually found my way to fused applique and to my own style.
Fabulous. All right, well, let's look at the next quilt.
The next one is called Multitudes. It's another bowl quilt, and it contains this quote by Walt Whitman, "I contain multitudes," and we all do. We are all, all the things that make up our lives, the experiences we've had, places we've lived, people we've known, and I like this idea of containing, so a bowl contains things, so that's in my bowl series.
Okay, and now I'm going to go back to the bowl that you just mentioned. Elements like a bowl or something that you're starting to use in your quilts, how do these subjects even come to you, and then how strongly do they become important to the work you're doing?
I think the first personal symbol that I used was probably a house, and one of the reasons that I like a house shape is because it's really easy to cut. It's just,
it is.
it's just 5 sides. And I'm not a trained artist, so I don't draw, so I like shapes that are relatively simple, as a bowl also is a simple shape to draw, but it just has so much potential for meaning, and it can go many different directions.
Well, symbolism is a huge part of your work, and we're going to continue to address that. For example, in the next pair of quilts, tell us about them and tell us the symbolism.
Right, I made the first quilt, the one with the tree in the middle of the silhouette, and it's about reflection and personal ideas of growth. So we have the tree suggesting growth there. And then I had cut out the silhouette from that teal fabric, and I had the negative cutaway that I was just planning to put in my pile of pre-fused fabric and use for something else at some point. But I thought, well, I've already got this silhouette cut out, I could make another silhouette quilt. And so this was actually the first pair of quilts that I made that are similar in composition, but yet kind of stand on their own.
Okay.
And then I chose the ladder for the second quilt.
And what's the symbolism?
The ladder's about getting from one place to the next, ever upward and looking ahead. And that sometimes it's a challenge. Sometimes getting from one step to the next takes some effort.
That's great.
Do you ever think that sometimes you have to climb down?
Yes, for sure. And another thing, like there's this sculpture at the Modern Museum of Art in Fort Worth that is a ladder, and it's suspended. And when I was reading about this sculpture, apparently the artist said, well, to get to that first step, you have to jump or have someone lift you up.
Oh.
And I just really like that. Isn't that great?
That is very, very great.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, the next quilt, the chair.
Yes, 2 chairs. I really love chairs as a personal symbol, and they can mean lots of things, but often it's about taking time to be still, which can be difficult.
That's hard.
Listen,
Yes.
and reflect.
And be aware of all the stuff that's going on around you.
And rest, because we work.
Right.
I also, while we're on those 2 quilts, I just want to point out the layers that you do. You have a very layered sense of style, so there's transparency and layers going on, and that's just part of what you do.
Exactly. All of my quilts are really about layering fabric, paint, and stitching.
Fabulous. All right, so now the next 2 quilts.
More ladders.
More ladders.
Those 2 really speak to me. I asked you, I thought it had to do with an orchard or something. It took me back to my grandparents, but
Well,
no.
and she said yes, because you ultimately said yes because whatever you want it to be.
Absolutely, absolutely. Those 2 quilts started with that red strip. I wanted to make that line of trees, and you can tell that it's the same red piece of cloth, the positive and the negative, and then the quilts were built up around those 2 red strips, and the ladder.
I love them. I love them. And you sell your work.
I do.
So that's important for people to know.
Before we go on, we need to say this because I know she won't say it.
Oh.
Yeah.
We have a little note that says you won first prize in Houston.
I did. I won first place in Art Quilt Miniature. It was absolutely just thrilling. It was really, really a wonderful,
You guys, let's give her some props. That's no small feat.
That's a big deal.
It was a great day.
Congratulations.
All right, so now the next 4 quilts are very similar in composition as well.
Yes, exactly. I like this idea of repeating compositions that work, because a lot of times that's the most challenging part of the creative process, is figuring out the design. So if you figured it out, just change out the fabrics and make another one of the same composition, which is what I did with those 4.
And I can't believe you don't have some art background.
Nope, I mean, I've taken classes, but I'm mostly self-taught and making a lot of work and kind of thinking about what I like to do, where my interest is, where my skills are, and putting that all together.
Well, and I'm going to say you've, of course, learned from the School of Hard Knocks, but you're now a teacher, and all of this that you've learned, which is very artful, you teach.
I do.
And you've even got a workbook. One of the things we've not said about Deborah is that she's a list maker.
It's true.
She writes lists and more lists.
It's
and
true.
I even see that in the fact that I don't just make one quilt, I have to make a companion quilt.
Right.
And I might have to make 4 quilts that are the same because of all of that. And so tell us a little bit about this workbook.
Yeah, so this workbook I developed because people often ask me, well, how did you develop your creative voice? And a lot of people say, well, you just have to make a lot of work. And actually, I think it's more than that. You really have to put together your head, your heart, and your hands and think about the work you want to make. So I developed a bunch of exercises that help you examine what's in your head, what's in your heart, what you can do with your hands to help you develop your creative voice.
Well, I want to say, I was looking at this at lunch and I found it very intriguing. Very intriguing.
It is intriguing. And let's go to the list part, because if you go clear towards the back now, and you're in your workbook. It's just lists. Here's the questions, and then you write your lists.
Yes, exactly. That's the art audit, which you can look at a finished piece of work and think about what worked, what didn't work, what was in your head, what was in your heart, what you did with your hands, and have a record.
Well, Ricky, you told me.
I did. He goes, we've got to get her. She's so mindful, great spirit, beautiful work. And it's not just, you're really feeling the whole process through your body.
I really love the whole process.
Love it.
I do.
Well, when we come back, Deborah is going to take us into a journey on how to use some commercial fabric, but then use your own creativity and shake it all up a little bit. And I'm just going to have to say in this next segment, we're going to rise up.
Right
Don't
on.
go anywhere. We'll be back.
Welcome back. I'm first on deck with Deborah. Deborah, you say that people have a hard time combining commercial fabrics with, say, hand-created fabric.
Exactly.
Really?
I think they do. Something about combining them can be tricky. So I've come up with some simple techniques for how I put those together.
Okay, so these are just beautiful, and they're commercial.
Exactly, commercial prints. So let's say I was going to make a quilt, and I'd pulled out these commercial prints in this color palette, and I wanted to mix them with some original surface design cloth. And then I come up with this. And so I'm going to show you 3 super simple techniques that add originality to your quilt. So we're going to talk about adding handwriting as a graphic element, which we see down here. And then we're also going to talk about making prints with a unexpected item that I'm sure you have on hand. And then we're also going to talk about doing this stencil using sequin waste.
Oh, wow. That is
so
great.
Here's the commercial print, commercial print, and then the rest of these are original designs.
And do you do this with most of your work?
All of my work includes some kind of original surface design.
Oh my gosh, how fun is that?
Yeah, it's fun.
Okay, let's get started with the first one. You've got some examples here.
Yes, so this is handwriting. I love handwriting as a graphic element. So I think that it suggests that there's a story behind the quilt and there's some ideas in there. So I really, and it's also so personal and unique to every person. So here's an example of handwriting that's all tight and clustered together. And here's one that's a little bit looser.
But I can't read it.
Oh, exactly. That's how it's supposed to be.
Oh, okay.
I really like to make it illegible so that when the viewer is looking at the quilt, they're not like trying to decipher what it says, because then they're lost. They're not appreciating the quilt as a whole. So I'm going to show you, we'll do a little practice here, and I'll tell you how you can make that happen. And then there's just one more sample that's super loose and much larger.
So when you do create this fabric, do you have the quilt in mind or the wall piece, or do you just make a bunch of this and then put it in your stash?
A little of both. I have lots of in my stash pieces with handwriting on it, but if I'm working on a quilt and I want to add a handwriting element in a color or a size that I don't have, I would create a piece for that quilt.
Okay, so like let's say you were working on your chairs or something like that. Would you write something that's relevant to chairs?
I might. And
Okay.
a lot of times I am writing about the themes that I'm exploring in the quilt. And then sometimes things come out of my head that I didn't even anticipate, which maybe, expand the theme on a personal level that maybe the viewer picks up on and maybe not.
Nice. Okay, so how do we do this?
Okay, so I love to use a Micron Pigma pen. I like the 08 size, which is the fattest size they have.
Right.
And I always use black, but Micron comes in lots of colors, and you could use any other color you wanted. So what I do is, to make something that looks like handwriting, you can't just make bumps and loops, because then it just looks like bumps and loops. So you really kind of have to have some words in your head as you're writing. But because we want it to be illegible, I stretch it out, I skip over some letters, I make the downstrokes exaggerated. So I might write something like this. I am here. So you can see I made that E really large. With Alex.
Okay.
And maybe I make it into an X.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's
So
just
you really-
a simple line.
You can't read it,
Can't read it.
but maybe kinda.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And then once, maybe you add some more lines and overlap and squish it all together, and then it's even less likely to be able to be read.
Okay, so
Do you want to try it?
yes, but I feel like you have practiced this, right?
I do it a lot. And a lot of times people also ask me, like, does it need to be stabilized? It doesn't. I don't stabilize it.
Look at that.
There you
I gotta
go.
go. I
There you go.
am
Perfect.
so glad.
Right.
I'm gonna go.
Yeah, stretch it out, exaggerate it. There you
Oh,
go.
no.
No, that's
Okay.
perfect. See, but once you stack it up and layer it together, it really starts to have some
Well,
personality.
that's not as good as yours, but it's not super legible either.
But you could stretch it out and exaggerate it and skip over some letters, and then you would get this idea of handwriting.
How long did it take you where you got that good?
I don't know. I think that I don't know, a couple of years, I don't know. I mean, a couple tries, it kind of comes together. I do it regularly.
Did you learn cursive in school?
I did. I did, but I don't write in cursive now, and I wouldn't even say that that's really cursive.
Well, no, I'm just though there's a whole generation that the kids did not learn to write in cursive, and it made me furious. And my daughter, who's an 8th grade teacher, said, fine, tell the parents to teach their kids manners and I'll teach them cursive.
There you go.
And I thought that was kind of fair,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
Okay, fun.
Okay.
Do you guys like that? Yes,
It's
right?
fun. It's
Yeah.
fun. Okay, so the next technique is toilet paper tube prints. This is a pretty advanced high-tech tool.
Okay.
I think you might be able to find one in your home. Okay, so here's some samples of.
I love that.
Isn't it great?
Yes.
It doesn't have to be complex or difficult or with tools that are hard to find. I really like simple tools.
But here's the thing. If I saw that on a bolt of fabric, I would want that.
And you wouldn't think toilet paper tube.
No, you would not
Right.
think that. Hey, my next line.
You have to give me credit. Okay, so this is a sample of a toilet paper tube print. Obviously, that's a square.
Uh-huh.
So here's kind of a leaf or a pod shape. And I really like doing a print in a all-over grid. I think it really works well. And then here's some advanced toilet paper tube printing. This 4-pointed star.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to do some toilet paper tube prints. Here's a piece of cloth
Thank
for you.
Now, what about the paint? What do you use?
I use acrylic paint straight out of the bottle. This is the Folk Art brand from Michaels. And I don't mix it with any textile medium. And a lot of people say, well, doesn't it change the hand of the fabric? And I say, yeah, that's part of what I really like about it. It adds texture. It sits right on the surface of the cloth. It reflects the light a little bit differently. And those are all things that are interesting to me for an art quilt.
Does this say like permanent or anything like that?
It is permanent.
Although you would never wash these, so.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Okay,
Yeah.
so.
Okay, so we squirted out some blue, and here you were going to.
I was going to do triangle.
Yes.
Look at, that's art
Yes.
right now.
And I'm going to do a square, and so I'm just folding that toilet paper tube into
This is
a
so much
square,
fun, I'm telling you.
right?
Okay,
Yeah.
so then what do you go, woo, like
Yeah,
that?
see, I dip it in the paint, and I blot a little bit off.
Uh-huh.
And then I just start printing. And I like some prints to be thick and blobby, and some prints to be much more faint and subtle. So you can do several impressions before you add more paint.
Now, are you always this organized or not really? When you're printing,
Well, the
just
truth
depends?
is I do kind of like things organized.
Okay.
But when I teach, I tell my students they can print it in a grid or they can print it randomly. It's up to them.
Are your spices in alphabetical order?
No, my husband might like them to be.
Oh.
My husband is even more organized.
This
and
is
you can see
great.
that I'm rotating the tube so that the shapes aren't all exactly the same. And I'm distributing out the blobby print, the blobby first print. I don't want them to all be right next to each other. So I make that first print
Oh, yeah,
in a
yeah.
different area of the cloth.
And I have to think.
Well, not that much.
Okay. And I want to point something out on this one that I thought was extremely charming, and that was the use of 2 different inks.
Exactly, 2 colors.
I mean, that is just really great fun.
Right.
Okay, now the last one, I wouldn't have thought of this. Well, I wouldn't have thought of that either, but I really wouldn't have thought of this.
Yeah,
What's
so
coming
this
up?
is another super simple surface design technique that we are going to try and that you can mix beautifully with commercial prints. And it's making a stencil out of sequin waste. So here's the sample. There's 2 samples here, and then this is the sequin waste.
I don't know what that means.
Well, you can get it at a craft store that still sells ribbon by the yard. And when the sequin makers press the sequins out of this metallic material, this is what's left over.
I was thinking, how do I put this on my waist? I mean, that's what so,
You could.
Well,
it would be, yeah.
it would not be
high
pretty.
fashion.
Okay, there we go. Okay, so what do we do now?
And then I have this awesome tool, which I call a spouncer, which is great for adding paint to anything. So here's a spouncer for you.
Thank you.
And here's a blob of paint. It looks like it might be
Is it
a
okay?
little bit dried from the lights, but that's okay. And I always want to start with not too much paint. I'm really going to blot off a lot of paint from the spouncer.
Well, yeah, because like, look at this. This is very, very subtle.
Very subtle. And also, you can add more, but you can't take paint away. So start with a little, and then I just hold the sequin waste down, and I just spounce the paint onto the cloth. And you can see I'm not going from side to side. I'm kind of adding some here and some there to get...
You could put some blue in.
I could.
Can I do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's try that.
Yep.
Like right in here?
Yeah, for sure. Awesome, awesome.
Uh-oh.
Oh, who cares?
Okay.
It's all going to blend together. Now, you just did my finger. Okay, now we have to work quickly because acrylic paint dries fast. But
Sorry
the
about
other
that.
thing we can do is we can turn it over and we can get a second impression of the negative with the paint that was on the top of the stencil.
Oh, yeah.
Ta-da!
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Love this.
right?
Love
Money
this.
shot.
So, how many of these tricks do you have? I mean,
There's several of them in my book. And, you know, the idea is that you can try anything. Anything that you have that will make an interesting pattern or shape is up for grabs.
this has really been fun. Yay,
Yay,
okay?
I love it.
Don't go away because Deborah has a systematic way to help you with design and composition challenges, and you are good at this.
Well, thank you.
Right after break. And yet still ahead, Julie Silber is taking us on a historical quilt trip back in time. You will not want to miss any of this. Stick around. Sorry about that.
Welcome back to the Quilt Show, everyone. We're here today with Deborah Boschert, and she's going to take us on a journey right now down through design and composition. And if you think that is something that you don't understand very well, she's got it all so you can do it. Just you wait.
Right on. So there's a chapter in my book all about design and composition, and there's two elements in that chapter that have been really helpful for students. And one of those is what I call the 8 design guides. And so I'm going to show you some samples here and some thumbnail sketches. So here's the first one. This is the grid design guide, and this is a very, very simple thumbnail sketch, and then here's the sample. Now, they don't look alike.
They don't look like, see, this one's 9 in a grid and this is 4 in a grid, but it's still on a grid.
Exactly. And so we're just using these design guides as springboards or templates or ideas to get you started.
In your grid guide, I also noticed that you've got not only the squares, but some of them have circles in it. So is that just to say, as a guide, shake it up?
Exactly. Mix in something
Change the
fresh.
color, do
Exactly.
something, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So here's the next design guide. This is Magic 3, and this is just the idea that if you want to do a quilt with some kind of shape, like fish or houses or teacups or flowers or whatever, 3 is a really great number to work with.
Do we know why?
Well, the eye likes 3. An odd number is good.
I also generally, I mean, a lot of people say odd numbers are good
Yes.
generally, and I think that there's a point where odd numbers, if you go to 17, well, now you don't know if it's 18 or 17.
Right.
But when you're down to 3 or 5, it just feels pretty good.
Exactly.
I like this one, and I'm just kind of looking at it compositionally because when I judge quilts, one of my big things is design and composition. That's the POW factor.
Right.
I love that we have 2 red fish and 1 that's different. It's just shaking it up a little bit.
Exactly. And they're also different sizes slightly, and they're distributed throughout the frame in, mixed up just a little bit.
And
they're not all aligned.
And in this case, they're all going the same direction, which means they're all in agreement.
There you go.
Okay.
That's good.
All right.
So here's the next design guide. This is the landscape design guide, which is simply horizontal strips. And then you can add details onto it.
And I'm looking at this, even though you say horizontal, it's got a wiggly line across it, but ultimately it's a band that's moving horizontally.
Right.
All right.
And the trick about this design guide is that it works horizontally like a landscape, but it also works vertically.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
All right.
So that's a little trick. This is the next design guide. This is 3rd plus. And so we've divided the frame of the composition into 1/3 and 2/3, and then we've added a detail.
And that's the plus.
Exactly.
That's when
the
you
plus.
go on a date and you've got a +1 going to the thing. Yep. All right.
That's the interesting part.
All
yes. So the next design guide is what I call modular, and this is where you've just stacked up elements that are related to each other by color or by shape or by some other visual element and placed them together in a pleasing way.
I love that.
And there's that ladder again.
I love that ladder.
And so this is the One Amazing Line design guide. And this is the idea that you can build a whole composition around just a line that is interesting to you. So it could be a squiggly line. Here it's just this gentle arch that I stitched that orange stitching on top of.
I think that's so funny because in my online photography class that I do, it's a year-long class. Right. One of the week 2, the challenge is find a line.
Exactly.
And people will show me lines and lines and more lines and more lines, but finding that one line. And I think this is interesting here because, of course, there are other elements, but it's that line that's becoming the strongest part of the whole composition.
Exactly. And it's where I started. And that's what's the hard part sometimes, is knowing where to start. So the next design guide is what I call the dancing grid. And this is the idea of taking a single shape or color or fabric and moving it around the composition in a way that feels rhythmic, like a dance. It's not filled in entirely because just like a dance, there's times when you're moving quickly and times when you're moving slowly. So that's the dancing grid design guide.
I love that. And it also, in this case, it kind of feels like bubbles that have just been displaced or so forth. But it always, ultimately, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, but even though you're giving us really hard facts, things that we can grab onto, in the end, you're taking this and going to your intuition.
Absolutely.
Because the intuition is the one that's saying yes or no to these answers.
And you're asking yourself, do you like it? Because that's the most important thing.
Absolutely.
Do you like it?
I agree with that.
This is the symmetrical design guide, and it's a design guide where elements are repeated on the left and the right. And you can see that it's not strict because I have these 2 purple squares here, but they're not on the other side, but that adds interest.
But overall, it is working on both sides, in this case, of a vertical line.
Exactly.
God, there are a million things I haven't done. Seriously, and this is just one of them.
Exactly.
All right? So I love that. Let's move on now to your fabrics choices.
So let's imagine we're making an art quilt. So the first thing I always do is pull together what I call a fabric palette. And I discuss this in my book. And here I have chosen a focus fabric. It's this beautiful batik. And then I've pulled together a whole bunch of other fabrics that relate to the focus fabric. I've mixed in solids and commercial prints and a variety of colors and lights and darks and some original surface design.
Sure,
yes,
so all of
and
that.
here's handwriting.
And when I do this, I call it a fabric stew, but when I do this, I want to actually remove from, because I might have brought a lot of ingredients to the table,
Yes.
but I want to get the others completely out of sight. I don't even want to mess with my eye.
Yes. Yes, and I don't want to have to keep going back to my stash. I want my fabric palette to be ready to go, and that alleviates some of the design decisions that have to be made along the way.
Okay, and what
So we
kind
have
of a
the
design
fabric
are we going to do today?
Right, so we have this laminated design guide, which is kind of an abbreviated collection of the information in the art and design in the design and composition chapter in the book. So we would say, okay, which of the design guides are we going to play with today? And I think we're going to go with this 3rd plus. And so I've circled it. This laminated guide lets me make notes on it with a dry erase marker. So third plus, what am I going to do with the third plus? Well, the first thing is I'm going to fill in 1/3 of the framework with the focus fabric.
Okay, and I'm looking at this is not just a piece of something we're using as a canvas. Is this actually part of what you're constructing on?
This would be the batting.
The batting, and
Exactly.
You're constructing on the batting.
I am, and I'm using fusible applique.
And you're using Misty Fuse.
I am using Misty Fuse. It's the best of the fusible webbing, and it always works. It's beautifully light, and it just works great with the kind of collage style of quilting that I like to do.
Okay.
So 1/3. Now, what are we going to do with this 2/3? How about teal? Well, that's pretty bold.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. It blends, but composition and design is about trying lots of possibilities.
And this one, because it's plain, it doesn't have any extra interest.
Yes.
You'd have to add the interest. And you
would.
Could. And you could.
So how about we've got this one? This has more interest. How about purple with circles? So it's pretty bold. It's pretty bright.
And it's not wrong.
It's not wrong.
Yeah.
No. But
it's not quite there.
Try something else. How about, since that purple was too bold, how about navy? And if I don't have a piece that fills the whole frame, no worries. I just fuse on an extra piece.
No worries.
No worries.
Yeah, just fill it on up.
Yeah.
No or you could cement it, but you don't have to cement.
Yes, no, you wouldn't. You could fuse it, or you can anything.
And that's
goes.
collage.
Exactly.
That really is collage.
Exactly. So I really like the navy. I think it's a little bit more subtle and is going to allow for some more interesting details, but it's too plain. So how about we find something that has a little bit more interest? Here is this navy with the circles. I really like this.
I do.
I think
like
this totally works. So we've got the 1/3 and the 2/3. Now the design guide is 3rd plus.
So we got to add something.
Got to add something. How about a blue square? Yeah,
Okay.
Okay.
Well, it's fine.
It's fine.
I don't see anything wrong with it.
It's fine. It kind of is a lot of blue. Let's try something else. How about this white? We've kind of picked up this white from this focus fabric.
My inclination is that it's blending too much here.
I agree.
And my second inclination, it feels small.
It's really floating. Yeah, definitely not the right choice. So how about we go back to that purple? And I think this works.
I do too, but can I say what I really think might work?
Yes, tell me.
I don't know if this is right or not, but I like this.
Yeah, I like it too. And the next step is adding details.
Oh,
And
hey, so I'm one step ahead.
You are.
Okay.
We'll keep in mind the idea that we want to pick up that off-white again.
Okay.
So we have on this laminated design guide, on the back side is the design checklist.
Okay.
Which is tons of questions that you can ask yourself along the way. No right or wrong answers, but it's going to help guide you to adding what could be the next choice.
Hey, listen to this. Are there areas that feel empty? Are the design elements overlapping? Could design be improved if it was rotated? Could the composition be improved by cropping? I mean, it's like you've made a list.
Yes,
You've
right?
made a list of questions.
These are all the questions that a lot of people are asking intuitively, but I've put them together.
Right.
Yeah, and this is slightly abbreviated. The full design checklist is in the book.
Okay.
Okay, so you mentioned the one about could it be improved by rotating, and I think maybe that might be something we'll consider in the next step.
Okay. All right. So are we?
That's
we're
this
here.
one.
Okay.
Yep. So here we have the background is all set. So another question from the design checklist is, are the colors repeated? And you wanted to bring in some of that off-white. So I think that this works. And let me just tell you, I love that fringy selvage edge.
I love that fringy selvage edge. I was going to point that out in the break when we were talking about this, and I'm glad you brought it up because that's a cool element.
Yes, so I would definitely include that. So can we bring in some more colors? Could we repeat this navy? Here's a navy option that's kind of interesting. I like that it blends with this navy, but is an entirely different print. I love this stripe. What about a navy stripe? This is really a straight edge. Could something curvy be more interesting? So here's this stripe in a curve.
All of those are questions you're just asking, and you have to make those decisions by looking at it. You can't imagine the answer.
Totally. That is exactly right. Well, I like this curvy one. So let's get rid of those.
All right.
So now we have these elements are building up these details. I'm playing around with which one goes on top, which one goes underneath. Let's add some light blue. So here's a couple of light blue fabrics, very similar. Either is fine. Actually, they both are even leaf motifs. So, you know, I just picked the one I like better, which happens to be this one. So could I add that in along with these other pieces?
All right. What other questions do you ask at this point?
Well, one of the questions is the composition visually chopped in half anywhere? Well, it absolutely is chopped in half along this line. So that means that I can rearrange things and maybe it'll be more interesting. So what if I...
So you've lowered, or I'll say lowered from where I'm standing. You've pulled those elements off of that line that separates the background.
Yes.
So that it's not completely bisected.
Exactly. So now everything is at a different level, and I think it's much improved.
Okay.
So we were going to check out rotating it.
Yeah, because this just doesn't work for me in this orientation.
And so how about we go vertical?
Yeah, I feel much better about that personally.
Right.
And I
do too.
feel like it's like a tree now growing up, or it's a building that's standing up.
Yes.
I mean, this feels like ground, that feels like sky.
And it has weight on the bottom. I agree.
Okay.
So we made all of those decisions. There's a million decisions to make along the way. So you can see I added a little bit of handwriting for detail, and we have this fabric background is all set. So another question from that design checklist is there a focal point? And some quilts have focal points and some don't. But this one really does seem to be the stage is set for some kind of focal point. I love houses, so how about a house shape? And I can play around with it here.
I think it feels too much like everything else that's there already.
It's too blendy, the shape is wrong. Yeah, it's definitely not working. So how about we try houses, but maybe several small houses? They're just kind of floating.
They're not doing it.
Not working. So how about we try a pop of color? A pop of color is always a good thing to explore. So this is definitely a pop of color. I've gone entirely outside of the palette, but it really doesn't work. It's just too much.
Can I play?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. This guy.
It fits in the color palette.
I like him, but I'll tell you why I like this guy. I like him because he sticks up on the top.
Yes, exactly. Those other ones were floating.
All right, now we are, if we only had more time.
Time, yes.
We're really running out of time here,
So here's the final piece. Now we're going to add stitching, and there's more questions on that design checklist about how to plan your stitching. We need to fill in this space. We can repeat some colors. We can repeat some motifs.
And now I want to show the reveal, okay?
Ta-da.
Here is the reveal.
Yes.
And look where this all started and look where it all ended. I love that you've added the embroidery to fill in some of the negative space.
Exactly.
You've repeated motifs through here.
Yep, the fern shape from the focus fabric.
You've done hand stitching up here. And
in
I
this
think,
gorgeous pearl-dyed cotton, hand-dyed
what do you think,
cotton.
everyone? Yay? Thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
I do. Sometimes I just want more time.
I know.
You know, everyone, you do not want to miss Deborah's book. This is a fabulous, fabulous book with all those wonderful things that we've shared today.
Right
I'm
on.
so happy for you in the book.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your
My
excitement and
pleasure.
joy with us
My
today.
pleasure.
When we come back, we're going to meet up with quilt historian Julie Silber. She's going to take us on a quilt journey that starts in 1950 and goes all the way back to 1880. Don't go anywhere. That's right after the break. Thank you so much. On the next Quilt Show, we're headed off to college, or make that collage, to learn all about the wonderful world of Michelle Senadajian.
Her collage work is extraordinary, and you will not believe what she uses to make her art.
The cool thing about those bags from the grocery store is that you can start stitching up over top of them, and then when you have enough, you can just cut away.
Plus, once you play around with the design, how do you get that professional finish? Michelle's got you covered from start to finish.
And our TQS cameras take you to the classroom of Laura Wozlowski. We're orbiting her Pretty Planet quilts and getting schooled on the best way to create bindings for odd-shaped quilts.
2 top-notch guests, 1 great show. Join us.
Welcome back. We're here with my buddy Julie Silber. And before we start looking at your quilts, I want to establish you're a quilt historian.
I am.
But it didn't start, it's not like you were quilting as a little girl or anything like that.
No, I wasn't quilting as a little girl or a big girl. But I studied American history in college. And in my last year of college, they finally started talking about ordinary people instead of wars and events and so on.
Kings and politicians and all that.
And Hamilton. And
Hamilton.
and I was interested in ordinary women, and quilts are a way to look into the lives of the women who made quilts and the people who lived with those women, and that's what I'm interested in. I love the objects, but I really love what goes along with them.
And I'm really excited because basically you're going to take us on a time warp travel.
I hope so. I'm going to start with the 1930s and with a quilt that you all might recognize, Grandmother's Flower Garden. And this is a doll quilt that was made probably by a mother for a kid. It's beautifully made, and you can see here it's fussy cut.
Oh, it is.
Yeah.
Every
and then
little unit.
Ricky pointed out these kind of doodahs in there.
Yeah.
I've never seen that.
Yeah. And this woman went to a lot of trouble. She finished it with the hexes and then bound it right around every single one. So
Well, and this was my final thing. I noticed this corner, and then the next corner, which is here. And then I went all the way over. Alex, you've got a corner over there.
Yep.
And then look at the last corner.
yes, and what you'll see in early quilts is that they are not as precise as we tend to be in the 20th century,
Nice.
which I think gives them a lot of life.
And again,
character.
And the date of this is 30s?
1930s.
Okay.
1930s.
Hey, Deborah, can you come in here and help us with the quilt,
Thank
please?
you,
And
Deborah.
still in the hi, Deborah. Then in the 1930s, there were people who
Oh, my God.
kind of went a little overboard, maybe.
Right.
This is a type of log cabin, but it's isolated. Each block is isolated. And each block, I think, has 17 pieces. It's just a top, and you can see on the back it was all hand sewn.
Hand
Okay,
piece,
now
people.
we've got to really zoom in on this. We just showed the full thing, but we need to get really close. Each one of these is like a little pineapple.
Was about an inch, would
Well,
you say?
said an inch and a half
Oh,
at least.
wow.
Oh, there's a dime right
Wow.
there. Okay. So, I mean, 17 pieces in an inch and a half. That's sorry. And it's hand done.
Beautiful.
Oh, my word.
Yeah.
It is gorgeous.
One of the other things that we find in the 1930s and 40s in America is quilts made from kits and patterns from magazines. And this is one. It's called Whirling Tulips, and it actually was done by a number of companies. And you can see it's not finished on that edge, but it's almost finished.
Right.
It was done by a number of companies. It was originally designed by a woman named Marie Webster at the end of the 19th century, but a lot of companies like Mountain Mist and so on copied the pattern or tweaked it a little bit, and women bought it in packages like we do now, or in magazine newspaper articles. So that's a kit.
And my understanding is that the background block was pre-stamped, so they knew exactly where to put the appliques?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes you got it even die cut, and sometimes you just got the fabric, and sometimes just the pattern itself.
I can see we're stepping back in time now.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and that's exactly why I brought this, which is called Hovering Hawks. It's another top, but what I wanted to show was compare this to the quilts that we just saw in terms of color. This is about 1910, and this
Okay.
kind of grayed out, subtle, not very bright was
Well,
popular.
and the blues were, I mean, even the dresses, I understand, or the more plain dresses of the day would have been this dark navy.
Yeah, and the indigo and navy blues were around for a long time, but around the turn of the century, the color got very, very soft. There's not a lot of brightness to it, as we saw in the pastels later. So we're going back in time.
Hold on, though. What about black? Talk about black.
Talk about black.
When
There was a lot of black during this period as well, and there was these prints that they called mourning prints, black and white prints, and this, well, no, that's kind of close to it, and this is kind of close to it,
This is
actually.
what I'm looking at, yeah. When did this sort of print get incorporated?
About 1880 or 1890, but after the turn of the century, but before 1920, when it got pastel-y and colorful.
This is machine pieced.
Well,
from that time period because the machine was out. So people were starting to
The machine
do
was invented in the early part of the 19th century, and by 1860 there were treadle machines in almost every house in
Yeah, so
America.
that's the
and
big
that
surprise
was,
for me.
That was Isaac Singer's doing. From 1880 to about 1910, we start to see blue and white quilts, and this one is really wonderful because the design is great. But check out where your thumb is.
Okay.
Let's see if we can see what that says.
1894. I see it. 1894.
MJW 1894. So we see two color quilts at the end of the century and going into the beginning of the 20th century. And here's an example of indigo and white.
Why is it so lumpy? It's pretty thick.
Because she put in a thick batting.
Okay, so I mean, okay. I'm just surprised at that, and yet it's hand stitched too, right?
Yes, it is.
Oh, ooh la la.
So now we're at the end of the 19th century. And this crazy quilt, which is a high-style crazy quilt, late Victorian crazy quilt, doesn't have a date on it, but we can date it in one way, which is that in the very center of the quilt, we see Lady Liberty, the Statue of Liberty, which was given to us by France and unveiled in 1886. So we know this quilt was made after 1886. There was a huge vogue for crazy quilts between 1875 and about 1910. And this falls right into the height of that period. Just beautifully done, abstract shapes, random shapes, and then highly embroidered and embellished.
It gives me goosebumps to see the work that's in that and the time.
And what you're looking
at
on the back is that crazy quilts are made on foundation. And this woman chose beautiful printed cotton fabrics from the period on which to do her top designs.
And it's important to say, too, that you do sell and purchase quilts.
I do.
Yeah. So
I do
if
indeed.
a person wanted to look at your collection, where would they go?
To juliesilberquilts.com.
And you also go to Houston and...
Oh, yeah, I do a few quilt shows. Remember we were looking at that 1910 quilt that had the black in it. This is what came before. This is 1870s, 1880s. So there's a whole change in the color range from the 1870s on to about 1900. Then it gets very grayish, as we saw in that top, and then it goes into the pastels. So this is a top, it's actually called capital T. I bought it from a woman who called it kimono. I can see why, but it has beautiful fabric. And she interspersed and sparkled it up with cheddar.
This thing is like pristine.
Yeah. It was
Well, one of the things that I love about seeing these today is how that fabrics have changed, but it's continuing. I mean, I was a baby quilter in the early 90s, and I can spot early 90s fabrics just like this, and they don't make them anymore.
Yes.
So this is what helps date quilts.
Okay, now let's just
Exactly.
get our hearts going.
Now we're at 1860. We've gone from about 1880 and that tea quilt to this applique in red and green, which was the vogue between about 1840 and about 1870. This one is hand appliqued, hand quilted, and also has trapunto.
It does.
Which you can see in these,
Yeah.
in
Oh, my
these
word.
beautiful vines and leaves that grid this thing. So just a beautiful, beautiful example. The red is called turkey red, and you can identify it because when it washes, it gets a kind of white cast to it. It was a very strong dye, and it was used by many, many women. This would have been a very fine quilt made by a wealthy woman.
And the green, which didn't turn brown. Why in this case?
Yeah.
Because dyes did not go in a straight line from inferior to, like during the wars, for example. Dyes became very inferior because we didn't have.
So is this better quality dye?
That is yes, and that you can see that was made by a woman
Wow,
who
how
would have
fortunate.
made it for an heirloom.
Yeah,
and she was a wealthy woman with time and a lot of skill.
I see there's a price tag on this one.
There's a price tag.
We have to talk later.
What we have here is just one block that was cut out of a quilt. Shall I lift it? No.
Now
let's
that's
put it down.
beautiful.
It was cut out of a quilt that was damaged, and it's a memory quilt in memory of Grandmammy Snowberger, April the 4th, 1859. Wow.
Oh my.
So this is another green. That actually has changed a little bit, but not much. The reds have also faded, but quilts were often signed in inks, either for friendship or memory, and this is a really beautiful example that happened to be cut out of a quilt that was otherwise damaged beyond repair.
Were you the one that cut it out then? Or you found it like this?
No, I actually have about 6 or 7 and framed most of them.
Very
That's
good.
smart. Yeah, that's
Very
smart.
good.
This beautiful thing, which is called Real, is a summer quilt. It doesn't have any batting, it doesn't have any quilting, but it is finished with a binding that matches the gridding. So we know that that's what she intended. In other words, it was not finished later by anybody else. These are beautiful prints from about 1840 or 50, and they're all turkey reds, that turkey red dye that I talked about, which was so strong and so popular, and almost every one of these is a different print. I love the scale, and the borders are just fantastic.
OMG. That's really all I can say about that. It's fabulous.
Yeah.
Now look at this.
Now here we're going back to the earliest quilt that I have brought.
Oh,
It is an
boy.
American quilt, although when I first saw it, I thought it might be English. The English did make quilts like this.
Holy schmoly.
Oh,
The format of this quilt is called Central Medallion, and it is what we inherit, what we Americans inherited from the English. A design in the center followed by multiple borders. This one, believe it or not, is, let's see the corner. It must be yours, Ricky. There it is.
Oh, there it is.
It says Mary Herring, Willingham, 1826, in cross stitch.
It is in cross stitch.
It's in cross stitch, and tiny little cross stitch. This would have been a fine, fine heirloom quilt made by that woman with a beautiful chintz border, peacocks and beautiful birds.
Where
and
would they get cloth like this?
these were imported fabrics.
Okay.
America did not yet have a domestic industry, and so these fabrics would have been incredibly expensive. In 1800, so this was made in 1826, every printed fabric in 1800 to about 1820 or 30 was made outside the country and brought in, so they were tremendously expensive. 1 yard of fabric in 1800 cost $6. Doesn't sound like much until you inflate it. $111.12
Wow.
per yard in 1800.
So, Julie, how do you know it was not made over in Europe?
Well, I actually wasn't sure, but
Right.
the great Barbara Brackman, who is a wonderful quilt historian, looked up the town. And although it sounds like it's an English town, or could be, there were no English towns with that name. So we know it's an American quilt. But it would have been a woman who inherited her design ideas from England, or perhaps even came from England.
Beautiful.
Wow, what do you think about these guys? Oh, seriously. I mean, it's breathtaking. And I hope we have you back and back and back. And seriously, I don't want to see the quilts until we reveal them, because I guess
It's just wonderful.
It's really
Yeah, it's
great.
Exciting.
Yeah,
Inspiring.
yeah.
It is.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Deborah, thank you so much for all that you shared with us today.
Thank you.
It's been
I'm happy
so
to
much
be
fun.
here. My pleasure.
And
Thank
Julie,
you.
thank you for the quilts. They're inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you
Good
all.
to see you. She's from my neck of the woods.
She is. You're
Yeah,
buddies.
it's a long time.
We hope you've enjoyed today's show. I know I certainly have, and
Oh, I certainly have. Absolutely. You'll want to stick around for the after set, because Deborah and I have a little thing to do. But until then, I'll just end with saying it's a new day every day.
this is amazing.
I agree.
Don't go anywhere. You don't want to miss the after set.
Look around at how lucky we are to be alive right now.
I'm looking for a mind at work.
Hit 'em quick, get out fast, chicka plow.
Every action's an act of creation.
We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And when I meet Thomas Jefferson, I'ma compel him to include women in the sequel. Work! So Deborah and I are Hamilton fanatics. And so that's the thing that has kind of been running through the show with me and you.
Yes.
And now we're just kind of sitting here finally getting the chance to talk about it.
Right.
I saw Hamilton in New York City with the original cast.
I also saw Hamilton in New York City with the original cast in January. My husband surprised me with tickets for my birthday.
And how did that feel when you got the tickets?
It was so awesome.
Were you already excited about Hamilton before the tickets?
I was in deep.
And the thing of it is with Hamilton is that I find that you need to download the music, you need to put your headphones on. And by the way, it's like 3 hours long. I mean, the whole recording is close to 3 hours. And then open up your computer with your laptop and have the words, the lyrics, and who's speaking, singing.
Exactly.
And forget the fact that the world's told you that it's rap, because it's just a way to tell the story, and it's not all rap.
Right.
Yeah. So that experience gets it going. So what do you think? Why do you think that? I mean, like, I'm obsessed with it. It's in my car all the time, and this has now been a year of that.
Yes.
Why do you think we connect with it? What's the thing?
It's so beautifully complex and inspiring, and there's just so many layers of story and music and history,
and there's a real story there.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's a real truthful story being told about our country, especially, and it's in its infancy. The opening line with "How does a bastard orphan son of a whore and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean? How does this guy grow up to be a hero and a scholar?" And suddenly you're following this all the way through a story where here's our first political sex scandal that happens in all of that. And we see the cabinet battles where we're starting to divide ourselves as a country into two factions. And then there's tragedy that strikes.
Yes.
I mean, there's children that are dying in this, and there is obviously Hamilton ends in the duel.
Yeah. Yes, like from the history books.
From the history books. And so anyway, it's to me, when I look at what Lin-Manuel Miranda did, who's the writer and starred in the thing, that
we both got to see,
crazy.
Even though he's no longer on Broadway.
But the fact that this genius has put this story together, I find it so creatively inspiring. We have stuff. Here's another one of my Hamilton shirts, because there's a million things I haven't done, but just you wait. So there's the kind of the Nike logo, and then the scene where George Washington is trying to say, look, we've got to go in there and get the British. We got to hit them quick, get out fast. And Hamilton says,
Chicka-plow.
And so, I made this mug, by the way.
I know,
and,
you sent me one.
I did. I made sure Deborah got one. So anyway, we're Hamilton fanatics, and I honestly have to tell anyone that's watching this little after set that if you have not engaged with Hamilton, it's truly one of the greatest things that's ever been produced in theater.
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we also talked today about you being a list maker.
Yes.
And so we have a little gift for you, a little parting gift, so to speak.
Awesome.
Yeah, for the list lady.
Great.
Now, you're going to have to make a list of all the things that you love about Hamilton at some point.
It's
That's going to be
long
a
list.
long list, won't it be?
Yes.
Look at this. List yourself.
List yourself.
Yeah, just open the pages and see what you're going to put in there.
List all the idiotic things you've done for money.
Try another one.
It happens, right? List how you'd like to change your outer life right now.
See, it's going to be fun.
I
You're
like
going to love that.
it.
That's going to keep you
fabulous.
busy. And if you need just some weekly reminders, there's a list for all the days of the week.
This week.
That's
I love
great.
it. Thank you, Ricky.
Thank you so much. We decided to do this little segment without Alex, who we love and adore, but she would have been lost because she's not yet seen Hamilton, but it's on her bucket list.
Good.
So thank you so much for all your inspiration today.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.